Number 1. The Unseen Guest. Hello everyone. Today, I want to share a story that still gives me chills every time I think about it. It's something that happened to me a few years ago, and it's the reason I can never feel comfortable being home alone anymore. I hope you're ready because this is a story about an unseen guest in my own home. It was a cold, rainy night in November, and my parents were out of town for the weekend. They had gone to visit some relatives, and since I had school projects to work on, I decided to stay home. At 18, I figured I was old enough to handle being alone for a couple of days. I had the whole house to myself, and I was actually looking forward to the peace and quiet. The first night was uneventful. I spent most of it binge-watching movies, eating junk food, and occasionally glancing at the storm outside. The sound of the rain hitting the windows was oddly soothing, and I fell asleep on the couch without a care in the world. The next day was pretty normal. I did some homework, chatted with friends online, and generally lazed around. By the time evening rolled around, the rain had picked up again, and it was darker than usual because of the heavy clouds. I decided to take a hot shower to warm up and relax. While I was in the shower, I heard a strange noise. It sounded like a faint knocking, but it was hard to tell over the sound of the water. I turned off the shower and listened closely. Nothing. I shrugged it off, thinking it was just the house settling or the wind. After all, it was an old house, and it made weird noises all the time. Once I got out of the shower, I wrapped myself in the towel and went to my room to get dressed. That's when I noticed something odd. The door to my bedroom was slightly ajar. I was pretty sure I had closed it before going to the bathroom. My heart started to race a little, but I tried to calm myself down. Maybe I had just forgotten. I quickly got dressed and went downstairs to make some dinner. As I was cooking, I kept hearing those faint knocking sounds again, this time coming from different parts of the house. It was like a soft tapping, almost rhythmic. My mind was racing with possibilities. Could it be an animal? A branch hitting the window? I tried to brush it off, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. After dinner, I decided to watch some TV to distract myself. I curled up on the couch with a blanket, trying to lose myself in a movie. But every few minutes, I'd hear that knocking sound again. It was starting to drive me crazy. I turned up the volume on the TV, hoping to drown out the noise, but it was no use. The knocking was persistent. Finally, I decided to investigate. I grabbed the flashlight and started walking around the house, checking every room, every corner. Nothing. Everything was in its place, and there was no sign of anything unusual. I even checked the windows and doors to make sure they were all locked. They were. Feeling frustrated and a bit foolish, I decided to call it a night. I locked my bedroom door and climbed into bed, hoping that whatever it was, it would go away by morning. I lay there in the dark, listening to the rain and trying to convince myself that it was all in my head. Just as I was about to drift off to sleep, I heard it again. The knocking. This time, it was right outside my bedroom door. My heart pounded in my chest as I listened, frozen in fear. The knocking grew louder, more insistent. I didn't know what to do. Should I open the door? Call the police? I reached for my phone, but it was dead. I had forgotten to charge it. I felt a wave of panic wash over me. I was completely alone, with no way to call for help. The knocking continued, growing more frantic. It sounded like someone was trying to get in. Summoning all my courage, I got out of bed and tiptoed to the door. My hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob. I took a deep breath and yanked the door open, flashlight in hand. There was nothing. No one was there. The hallway was empty. I shone the flashlight around, my heart racing. I was about to close the door when I heard a whisper. It was so faint, I almost thought I imagined it. It said, "I'm here." I slammed the door shut and locked it, my hands shaking. I didn't know what to do. I felt trapped, terrified. I climbed back into bed and pulled the covers over my head, hoping it would all just go away. The knocking continued for what felt like hours, but eventually, it stopped. I lay there, wide awake, listening to the rain and the eerie silence that followed. I didn't sleep a wink that night. The next morning, I was exhausted but relieved that the ordeal seemed to be over. I got up, cautiously opened my bedroom door, and looked around. Everything seemed normal. I went downstairs to make some coffee, trying to shake off the lingering fear. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. On the kitchen table was a note. It was written in shaky handwriting, and it simply said, "I was here." I never found out who or what was responsible for the knocking, the whisper, or the note. My parents came home later that day, and I told them everything. They checked the house thoroughly, but there was no sign of forced entry, no clues, nothing. To this day, I still don't know what happened that night. All I know is that I was not alone. Something, or someone, was in the house with me. And the memory of that night still haunts me. Number 2. The man in the window. Hey everyone. I have a story to share with you that still gives me the creeps to this day. It's a true story that happened to me when I was a teenager, and it's one of the reasons I never feel safe when I'm home alone. So, grab a blanket, turn off the lights, and let me tell you about the man in the window. It was the summer before my senior year of high school. My parents had decided to take a short vacation to visit my grandparents, who lived a few states away. I had a summer job and couldn't get the time off, so I stayed home. They would only be gone for a few days, and I figured it would be fun to have the house to myself. The first couple of nights were uneventful. I watched movies, ate junk food, and enjoyed the freedom. Our house was in a quiet neighborhood, so I wasn't too worried about being alone. I locked the doors and windows before going to bed and didn't think much of it. On the third night, something strange happened. I had just finished watching a movie and was getting ready for bed. It was around midnight, and I was brushing my teeth when I heard a noise. It was a soft tapping sound, like someone was gently knocking on a window. I turned off the faucet and listened. The tapping continued, rhythmic and persistent. My heart started to race. I lived in a 2-story house, and my bathroom was on the second floor. There was no way someone could be knocking on the window up there. I cautiously walked to my bedroom and looked out the window. The street was quiet, and there was no one in sight. I tried to calm myself down, thinking it was just my imagination or maybe the house settling. I climbed into bed, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening for any other sounds. After a while, I finally started to drift off to sleep. Suddenly, I was jolted awake by a loud thump. It sounded like it came from downstairs. My heart pounded in my chest as I strained to hear any other noises. Silence. I got out of bed and grabbed my phone, my hands shaking. I crept down the stairs, trying to be as quiet as possible. When I reached the bottom, I noticed that the back door was slightly open. I knew I had locked it before going to bed. My mind raced with possibilities. Had someone broken in? Was there someone in the house with me right now? I dialed 911 and whispered to the operator that I thought someone had broken into my house. They told me to stay on the line and that they would send the police. I locked myself in the bathroom and waited, my heart pounding in my ears. A few minutes later, I heard the sound of sirens. The police arrived quickly and searched the house. They didn't find anyone, but they did notice that one of the windows in the living room had been tampered with. It looked like someone had tried to pry it open but failed. They told me that it was possible someone had been trying to break in but got scared off by the noise. The police advised me to stay with a neighbor or a friend for the rest of the night, but I didn't want to leave the house. I called my best friend, Sarah, and she agreed to come over and stay with me. I felt a locksmith and had all the locks changed. I also asked my parents to come home early, and they agreed. They arrived the following day, and I felt a huge sense of relief. For a while, everything seemed to go back to normal. I tried to put the incident out of my mind and focus on getting ready for the new school year. But then, something happened that made my blood run cold. About a week after my parents came back, I was in my room, organizing my school supplies. I found a small notebook that I hadn't used in years. Curious, I opened it up. On the first page, in shaky handwriting, were the words, "I see you." I stared at the words, my heart pounding. I had no idea who could have written it or when it had been written. I showed it to my parents, and they were just as baffled as I was. We couldn't figure out how the notebook had ended up in my room or who could have written the message. To this day, I don't know who was trying to break into my house that night or how they managed to write that message in my notebook. All I know is that I was being watched, and that thought still haunts me. So, if you ever hear strange noises when you're home alone, don't ignore them. And always make sure your doors and windows are locked. You never know who might be out there, watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. Number 3. The footsteps in the attic. Hi everyone. I have another chilling story for you. This one is about an experience I had a few years ago when I was home alone for the weekend. To this day, I still get uneasy thinking about it. So, get comfortable and prepare yourself for the story of the footsteps in the attic. It all started on a Friday evening. My parents had gone on a weekend trip to celebrate their anniversary, leaving me, a 16-year-old, alone in the house. I was thrilled to have the place to myself and had planned to invite a couple of friends over for a movie night. Unfortunately, both of them ended up cancelling, so I was left alone with my snacks and a stack of horror movies. I spent the evening watching movies and munching on popcorn. The house was eerily quiet except for the occasional creak of the old wooden floors. I didn't think much of it at the time. I had lived in the house my whole life and knew all its noises. Around midnight, I decided to call it a night. I turned off the TV, cleaned up the living room, and headed upstairs to my bedroom. As I was brushing my teeth, I heard a faint sound coming from above. It was a soft, rhythmic thumping, like someone walking slowly. I stopped and listened, my heart starting to race. The sound seemed to be coming from the attic. I tried to convince myself that it was just the house settling or maybe a squirrel that had found its way in. But the more I listened, the more it sounded like footsteps. I finished brushing my teeth and went to my room, trying to ignore the noise. I climbed into bed and pulled the covers up to my chin. The footsteps continued, now accompanied by occasional scraping sounds. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with possibilities. Was someone in the attic? But how? The only way into the attic was through a small door in the hallway ceiling, and it was always locked. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know what was making those noises. I got out of bed, grabbed a flashlight, and quietly crept down the hallway to the attic door. My hands were shaking as I reached for the string to pull down the ladder. I gave it a gentle tug, and the ladder descended with a creak. I shone the flashlight up into the darkness, my heart pounding in my chest. I took a deep breath and started to climb. The attic was filled with old boxes and forgotten items, all covered in a thick layer of dust. The beam of the flashlight cut through the darkness, but I couldn't see anything out of the ordinary. I stood there for a moment, listening. The attic was silent now. I started to feel a bit foolish for letting my imagination get the better of me. Just as I was about to turn around and go back down, I heard it. A soft whisper, so faint I almost missed it. It sounded like someone saying, "Help me." I froze, my heart racing. The whisper came again, this time a little louder. "Help me." It was coming from the far corner of the attic, behind a stack of old boxes. I slowly made my way over, the flashlight trembling in my hand. When I reached the corner, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There, in the dust on the floor, were footprints. They were small, like those of a child, and they led to a wooden chest. The chest was old and worn, with rusty metal hinges. It looked like it hadn't been touched in years. The whisper came again, louder this time. "Help me." I hesitated, then slowly reached for the lid of the chest. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely lift it. Inside, I found a dusty old doll and some yellowed papers. I picked up one of the papers and shone the flashlight on it. It was a letter, dated over 50 years ago. The letter was from a little girl, begging for help. She wrote about how she was trapped in the attic, how she was scared and didn't know what to do. My heart ached for her as I read her words, and I wondered what had happened to her. Suddenly, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around, but there was no one there. The whisper came again, right next to my ear. "Help me." I dropped the letter and ran back to the ladder, practically falling down the steps in my haste to get out of the attic. I slammed the attic door shut and locked it, my heart pounding in my chest. I spent the rest of the night in my room, too scared to sleep. The footsteps continued, but now they were accompanied by soft sobbing. The next morning, I called my parents and told them everything. They came home early, and we searched the attic together. We found the letter and the doll, but nothing else. There was no sign of anyone having been up there. We did some research and found out that a little girl had indeed lived in the house over 50 years ago. She had disappeared under mysterious circumstances, and no one knew what had happened to her. To this day, I believe that her spirit was trying to reach out to me, asking for help. I still get chills thinking about that night and the footsteps in the attic. And every time I hear a strange noise when I'm home alone, I wonder if it's her, still trying to find someone who can help her. So, if you ever hear strange noises coming from your attic, don't ignore them. You never know who might be up there, waiting for someone to hear their cries for help. Number 4. The Silent Caller. Hey everyone, today I want to share with you a story that happened to me a few years ago. It's something that still haunts me whenever I think about it, and it made me fear being home alone. So, settle in and let me tell you about the Silent Caller. It was the summer before I started college. My parents had gone on a week-long vacation, leaving me alone in the house. I was excited about having the place to myself, as it felt like a little taste of independence before I moved out. The first few days were great. I spent my time relaxing, catching up on TV shows, and hanging out with friends. But then, halfway through the week, something strange happened. It started with a phone call. It was around 9 p.m., and I was watching a movie in the living room when the phone rang. I picked it up and said hello, but there was no answer. I repeated myself a few times, thinking it might be a bad connection, but all I heard was silence. After a few more seconds, the caller hung up. I shrugged it off, assuming it was a wrong number or a prank call. The next night, at almost the exact same time, the phone rang again. I answered, and once again, there was silence on the other end. I waited for a bit, listening, but no one spoke. I hung up, feeling a bit uneasy. This continued for the next few nights. Always around the same time, always the same silence. By the fourth night, I was starting to feel really creeped out. I told my best friend about it, and she suggested I ignore the calls. So that night, when the phone rang, I let it go to voicemail. A few minutes later, my cell phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. I hesitated, but then answered. Silence. I hung up, my heart pounding. I decided to turn off my cell phone and disconnect the house phone for the night. The next day, I reconnected the house phone and checked the voicemail. There was a message. I played it, and all I heard was breathing. Slow, steady breathing. I deleted the message, feeling a growing sense of dread. I decided to spend that night at my friend's house. I told her everything, and she agreed that it was really creepy. We stayed up late, talking and trying to figure out who could be calling me. We didn't come up with any answers. The following day, I returned home. I was still scared, but I had convinced myself that it was probably just a prank. I spent the day running errands and trying to keep my mind off the phone calls. That night, I decided to go to bed early. My heart started to race as I stared at the ceiling, hoping it would stop. It didn't. I reluctantly got out of bed and went to the living room to answer the phone. "Hello?" I said, my voice shaking. Silence. "Who is this? Why are you doing this?" I demanded. There was a long pause, and then, finally, a voice. It was a whisper, barely audible. "I'm watching you." I dropped the phone and ran to my room, locking the door behind me. I called my parents, but they didn't answer. I left them a frantic message, telling them about the calls and the whisper. I was terrified and didn't know what to do. I spent the rest of the night hiding in my room, jumping at every little sound. The phone didn't ring again, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The next day, I went to stay with my friend again. My parents called me back and told me they would come home early. I felt a bit better knowing they were on their way, but I was still scared to go back to the house. When my parents arrived, we called the police. They came and checked the house, but didn't find anything suspicious. They told us that it was likely just a prank caller and that we should be careful. We changed the phone numbers and added a security system to the house. I never received any more of those silent calls, but the experience left me deeply shaken. To this day, I still get uneasy whenever I hear the phone ring at night. And whenever I'm home alone, I can't help but remember those terrifying nights and the voice that whispered, "I'm watching you." So, if you ever get strange phone calls when you're home alone, don't ignore them. It might be nothing, but it could be something more sinister. Stay safe, everyone. Number 5. The Stranger in the Closet. Hey everyone. Today, I want to share with you a terrifying experience I had when I was home alone a few years ago. This story still gives me nightmares, and I hope it serves as a reminder to always stay vigilant. So, get comfortable and let me tell you about the stranger in the closet. It was a chilly winter evening, and my parents had gone out for the night to attend a company party. They left me in charge of the house, as I was 17 and they trusted me to handle things on my own. I was looking forward to a quiet night of binge-watching my favorite TV shows and enjoying some alone time. After they left, I locked all the doors and windows, double-checking to make sure everything was secure. I made myself some hot chocolate, grabbed a blanket, and settled on the couch in the living room,